I'd been camping in rough country for years and never had a bad encounter. Nothing worse than a raccoon getting into my food bin. That's part of why I stopped being cautious about the small stuff. I got too comfortable in places where I should have been alert, too relaxed in parts of the woods where things go wrong fast. This trip was supposed to be simple, just me and my dog, Daisy, a 3-year-old golden retriever. It was late October, and the days were getting shorter. I'd been working long weeks and hadn't gotten a break in a while. I loaded up my gear, packed a cooler, and drove 3 hours north to a spot I liked for its quiet and remoteness. It wasn't even on a marked trail, just an old logging road I'd discovered by accident years back. Most people didn't come this far unless they were lost or trying to get away from something. The road ended about a half-mile from a small clearing where I usually set up camp. It wasn't much, just a flat patch tucked between tall pine and fir trees with a fire ring I'd built up with stones. There was a slow creek nearby where I could filter water, and thick woods behind me that ran for miles. I'd seen deer out there, and once a moose, but nothing else. No signs of predators. I'd always felt safe there. I got in late afternoon, set up my tent, got a fire going, cooked some food. Daisy was her usual curious self, sniffing everything and bouncing between the trees like she was seeing the woods for the first time. She slept in the tent with me and was a surprisingly good watchdog, alert to any small sound, even in her sleep. The first night passed without anything strange. Cool air, the sounds of the forest, nothing out of the ordinary. But on the second night, things started to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious, just a low tension that hung in the air like a thread pulled tight. I remember waking up around 2 a.m., and Daisy was sitting up, stiff, staring at the tent wall. Her ears were up, and she wasn't growling or barking, just tense and watching. I didn't hear anything, but I trusted her instincts more than mine. I waited, sat up slowly, and just listened. Sometimes I could pick up subtle things if I stayed quiet long enough. For a while, there was nothing. Then I heard the crunch of pine needles, soft, slow, almost like something walking in a careful, calculated way. Not the heavy, sloppy steps of a deer or the scrambling hops of a raccoon. Something bigger, but cautious. I couldn't see anything through the tent wall, and I wasn't about to open the flap and shine a light into the woods. I didn't want to spook it or draw attention. I kept a hatchet near the tent entrance, grabbed it, and waited. Daisy stayed alert, eyes locked forward, but she didn't make a sound. After maybe 5 minutes, the steps faded. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, trying to calm myself down. I convinced myself it had probably been a bear passing through. Maybe it smelled the food or heard us moving and got curious. Bears usually avoid people, and even more so if there's a dog. The next morning, I walked the area around camp. There were signs of something passing through, broken twigs, disturbed leaves, but no clear tracks. I didn't like it, but I wasn't scared enough to pack up and leave. I made a mental note to keep Daisy extra close and to clean up camp even more thoroughly at night. I kept her leashed for the rest of the day. That afternoon, I took a short hike along the creek and looped back toward the ridge above my camp. I like getting a bird's eye view of the area. From there, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Just off the clearing, about 30 yards back in the woods, was a dead rabbit. Ripped open like something had torn into it but didn't eat much. The thing that stood out most was that it was fresh, maybe 2 hours old, max. There weren't any birds or bugs on it yet, and Daisy hadn't caught the scent. Whatever did it hadn't killed to eat. It was like it was hunting for the sake of it. That's when I started thinking about predators again. Something hunting but not feeding. Coyote, maybe. They're opportunistic and go after small game, but rarely kill just to kill. Unless they're training young or spooked in some way. I stood there longer than I should have, trying to make sense of it. That night, I built a larger fire than usual. I kept Daisy inside the tent with me and locked the cooler inside the truck, well away from camp. I was tired, but I couldn't sleep. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. I barely heard any night sounds. Even the owls weren't calling. That kind of silence usually means there's a predator nearby. It was close to 3 a.m. when I heard something again. This time, it wasn't soft footsteps. It was movement, fast but just outside the firelight. I couldn't see anything through the tent wall, but I could hear it circling back and forth, in and out of the range of the fire. Then Daisy started growling, low and constant. She was standing now, hackles up, staring at the back of the tent. I grabbed the flashlight and the hatchet and unzipped the tent just enough to look out. I scanned the trees. The fire was still going strong. I didn't see anything at first. Then I caught a pair of eyes, low to the ground, close together, reflective in the beam of the flashlight. Not a bear, not a cat, too low. Coyote, maybe, but big. It didn't run when the light hit it. It just stared head low, body still, like it was calculating. That's what unnerved me most. It didn't act like a typical predator. No fear, just patience. I yelled, threw a rock in its direction, and it bolted fast and low, weaving into the trees like a streak of muscle and fur. Daisy barked and lunged forward, nearly yanking the stake from the ground where her leash was tied. I pulled her back into the tent and waited for morning. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. We were leaving. I packed up as quickly as I could. The ground near the tent had a few faint tracks. Paw prints, definitely, and too large to be a house cat or a fox. They weren't dog prints either. Long, narrow, with claw marks. I started thinking through what I'd seen. Coyote, most likely. Maybe a big one. But what bothered me was its behavior. They don't usually come that close unless they're starving or sick. Unless they've been fed before by people and lost their fear. But this one had patience and boldness. Like it had done this before. I got everything loaded into the truck and opened the door to let Daisy in. That's when I saw something that froze me in place. On the side of the truck, about halfway up the panel, were 4 dirt-streaked claw marks. They weren't deep, but they were clear. Long and dragging, like something stood on its hind legs and tested the metal. Coyotes don't do that. We got in and drove out fast, bouncing down the old logging road. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. My hands were shaking the entire time. Back home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I called a buddy of mine who worked with the Forest Service and described what happened. I didn't go into too much detail, just said I had a close encounter with a coyote near camp. He told me something that still sticks with me. Unless they're starving, they don't go after anything bigger than them, he said. They'd leave you alone. But dogs? That's different. They see dogs as prey or competition. If it was stalking you, it probably wasn't after you. It was after your dog. That hit me hard. All those times Daisy had been barking or pacing or sitting alert in the tent, she wasn't sensing something watching me. It was her. She was the target. That rabbit I found? It was a message, a trail marker, something to lure, and I had no idea how close we'd come to losing her, or both of us. I haven't been back to that spot since. In fact, I stopped camping deep in the woods altogether for a while. These days, I stick to marked trails and busy campgrounds. I still bring Daisy, but I keep her leashed and close at all times. I don't leave food out. I don't get comfortable, because now I know that sometimes what's out there isn't afraid of you. Sometimes it's just waiting for the right moment, and it's not always you it's after. Sometimes it's your dog. I'd been camping alone for years, and I'd gotten used to the feeling of being deep in the woods, where there's no cell service, no traffic noise, and no one around for miles. I liked it that way. I liked the quiet, the stillness, the sense of being away from everything that pulled and pushed in daily life. But this trip, I ended up stumbling into something I wasn't prepared for. Something older than the trails, and more dangerous than any wild animal I'd worried about. This all happened maybe 5 or 6 years ago, during a solo trip through a stretch of forest land near the Kentucky-Tennessee border. I won't say exactly where, because after what I saw, I don't want anyone poking around there. I'd been doing multi-day backpacking trips for a while by then, and I was always trying to find more remote, less used areas. That's how I ended up planning a loop that followed some unmarked paths, old logging cuts, and deer trails through land that hadn't seen real development in decades. It was thick country, dense woods, deep ravines, and old ridgelines. You could hike for hours without seeing a soul. I started on a Friday morning. The forecast was clear, cool in the evenings, and dry all weekend. Perfect for hiking. I had a basic topo map and my pack loaded with the usual gear: tent, stove, food, water filter, first aid kit, bear spray, and a small camp axe. I brought enough food for 4 days just in case, but I only planned to be out for 3. My goal was to make a wide loop, bushwhack across a narrow valley on the second day, and then follow a dry creek bed back toward where I started. The first day went as planned. I parked my truck in a wide pull-off on the side of an old gravel road, shouldered my pack, and started walking. It was quiet and peaceful. I only heard birds and the wind through the trees. By late afternoon, I found a flat spot on the edge of a rise and set up camp. I built a small fire ring, gathered some dry wood, boiled water for a dehydrated meal, and spent the evening reading and listening to the sounds of the forest. Nothing unusual, but the second day was where everything changed. I broke camp early that morning, crossed a creek, and started moving deeper into the woods. The terrain got steeper and harder to navigate. The path disappeared in places, and I had to rely on compass bearings and dead reckoning to stay on course. Around mid-morning, I found an old, overgrown roadbed running east-west. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Moss-covered rocks lined the edges, and the middle was filled with saplings and fallen branches. It wasn't on the map, but I figured I could follow it east for a while before cutting south toward the valley I wanted to cross. As I walked, I noticed the air seemed still. I couldn't hear birds anymore, just the crunch of my boots and the soft hiss of wind through tall grass. It gave me a strange feeling, like something was off, but I kept going. After another hour, I started seeing signs of old activity. Rusted metal lying in the underbrush, half-rotted wooden boards, empty, weathered barrels tipped over and split apart. Most of it was barely recognizable, but something about it felt wrong. That's when I started to notice the smell. It was faint at first, sour and chemical, almost like rotting fruit or burned sugar. It reminded me of old oil or spilled fuel. I slowed down, stepped off the trail to take a leak, and that's when I saw it through the trees, just a glimpse at first. A structure, half hidden in thick brush and shadows. At first I thought it was an old hunting shack, maybe a fallen barn. But the closer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't just a single building. There were rusted tanks, coils of old copper tubing, blackened fire pits, shattered mason jars, dozens of them. A still, a moonshine still. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but something about it still looked functional. There were new-looking tarps covering one side, fresh-cut wood stacked nearby, a trail of flattened grass that looked too recent to have grown over yet. It looked abandoned and used at the same time, like someone had left in a hurry but might come back. My dad had told me about places like this. He worked for the Soil Conservation Corps back in the 50s and once found a still deep in the woods. Said it scared the hell out of him. Back then, moonshiners had a reputation for being dangerous. Some were just trying to make a living, but others didn't hesitate to kill if they thought you were law enforcement or snooping around. They hated outsiders, especially ones who might report what they'd seen. That story hit me hard in that moment. I backed up slowly, keeping low, heart pounding. I didn't know if anyone was watching. I didn't know if someone was nearby, hiding in the brush with a shotgun across their lap. Every sound I made felt too loud. I turned and started back the way I came, carefully but quickly. But I hadn't marked my trail well, and in my rush, I lost the old roadbed. The woods all looked the same. I tried to stay calm and retrace my steps, but the brush was thicker now, like it had grown up behind me. After maybe half an hour of stumbling and zigzagging, I stopped to get my bearings. That's when I saw movement, just a flash. Something low and quick, maybe 50 yards behind me. Could have been an animal, but I couldn't be sure. My instincts screamed at me to move. I turned and started hiking faster, not running, but close to it. I didn't stop again until I was a mile or so away and the smell was gone. The woods felt normal again. Birds, insects, scattered sunlight. I took a few deep breaths and checked my map. I wasn't where I wanted to be, but I had a general idea of how to get back on course. I picked a new path that would take me away from the still and toward a ridgeline I recognized from earlier. I hiked until evening and set up camp in a small hollow near a stream. I didn't build a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I ate a cold meal, kept my gear packed tight, and slept with my boots on and the axe close. That night, I barely slept. Every twig snap, every gust of wind made my muscles tense. I didn't know if I'd been followed. I didn't know if they'd seen me, but I knew that place wasn't just an old ruin. It was active. Someone had been there recently, and I had no business being anywhere near it. The next morning, I packed up before sunrise and started hiking fast. I cut my loop short and aimed straight for the nearest fire road that I knew led back toward the truck. It was rough terrain, but I didn't stop. My whole body felt tight with adrenaline, like something was watching me. I checked over my shoulder every 10 minutes. Never saw anything, but that didn't calm me down. About 2 hours from the truck, I found another marker that sent my heart racing. Bootprints. Not mine. Fresh, deep, and going the same direction I had just come from. Someone else had been through there recently. Within a day, maybe less. I moved faster. When I finally reached the truck, I checked the area first. Looked around for signs of tampering or anything out of place. Everything seemed fine, but I didn't relax until I was miles down the road. Engine humming and trees thinning out in my mirrors. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone the full story for a while. Just said the trip had been cut short. But the more I thought about it, the more it bothered me. That still wasn't ancient history. Someone was keeping it alive, tucked away where no one was supposed to be, and I'd walked right into it. The weirdest part, though, was that it wasn't on any maps. Not topographical ones, not old forestry ones. I checked. That trail, that roadbed, that entire hollow, it was like it had been scrubbed from the records, or never officially recorded. Just another forgotten part of America's backwoods, where old habits die hard. I haven't gone back there since, and I don't plan to. I've changed the way I camp now. I stick to designated trails. I avoid unmarked valleys, and I always trust that gut feeling when the air gets still and the birds go silent. Because out there, in places where law never fully reached, there are still corners of land guarded by people who don't want to be found. And if you stumble in by accident, they won't care why you're there. They'll just want you gone. And if you're smart, you'll leave the way my dad did, fast, quiet, and without a trace. Because some parts of the woods aren't for us. They never were. I'd always heard stories growing up about people stumbling on moonshine stills in the woods. Mostly old-timers telling tales over a fire or around the garage, usually with a beer in hand and a slow shake of the head. They'd say things like, "You come across a still, you better mind your business." Or, "Some places ain't meant to be found." There was one guy, a friend of my uncle's, who swore that if you ever came across one, you should throw a log on the fire as a sign of goodwill, like a peace offering. He said it let whoever ran it know you weren't there to cause trouble. I never thought much of it. Figured it was one of those half-true, half-lore things passed around over the years. But that piece of advice came back to me real fast during one trip I took out into the woods of southern West Virginia, in a stretch of hills and hollers so remote it felt like another time. It was late October, the kind of trip I usually look forward to all year. I'd planned a 3-day solo hike through old Forest Service land, following logging roads and deer paths. I'd done the route once before, but that time I only stayed one night. I wanted to really explore the area this time, go deeper, take a longer route. The weather was perfect, cool, dry, and quiet. Leaves had mostly fallen, so visibility through the trees was good, and there was hardly any wind, just stillness. I parked my truck off a gravel pull-off near an old fire road and set off that first morning with my pack loaded down, feeling strong and focused. It always took me a couple of miles to settle into a rhythm, but once I did, I felt good. I passed an old hunting cabin, boarded up windows, moss growing on the shingles, then crossed a shallow creek, followed a ridgeline for a while, and dropped down into the thick hollow on the other side. That's where things started to feel different. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on at first, just a slow tension in my chest, like the woods were watching me. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just the isolation, maybe a little caffeine crash from the early morning coffee. But I found myself looking over my shoulder more often than I should have. Every time I stopped to drink water or take a breath, I noticed how quiet it was. Not just peaceful, dead quiet.
No birdsong, no rustling squirrels.
Just the distant groan of trees settling in the windless air. By early afternoon, I made it to a flat stretch above a draw, where I planned to camp. I dropped my pack and started scouting a spot when I noticed an old roadbed just below, partly overgrown but still clear enough to follow. It wasn't on my map, but I figured it might lead to a water source. I took a quick detour to check it out, bringing just my knife, flashlight, and a bottle of water. The road curved down into the draw, hugging the edge of a slope. As I rounded a bend, I saw it just like that. Tucked back in the trees, half camouflaged with leaves and brush, was an old shack. Rough-hewn boards, rusted metal sheets for roofing, a stone fire ring off to one side. And next to it, unmistakable once I saw it, a still. Big metal barrels, copper piping, buckets. The fire pit looked old, but there was ash in it, and the ground nearby was trampled in a way that told me someone had been there not too long ago. My heart started hammering in my chest. I knew what I was looking at, and I knew enough not to stand there like an idiot. My first instinct was to back away, but that's when that old memory hit me, what my uncle's buddy said. Throw a log on the fire. Show you mean no harm. I looked around. There were branches everywhere. I grabbed one, dead but not rotted, and stepped up to the pit. I paused for a second, then tossed it in. The log hit the cold ash and kicked up a faint puff of dust.
No flames, no smoke.
Just a symbol, a gesture. I didn't wait around. I turned back and walked fast but steady up the slope, back to where I dropped my pack. I didn't run. That felt like a mistake, like running would make me look guilty. I didn't see anyone, didn't hear anything, but every hair on my body was standing up. Back at my gear, I re-shouldered my pack and moved down the ridge another half-mile before I stopped again. I found a new site, not ideal, slightly sloped, too close to the trail, but I wasn't about to sleep anywhere near that still. I set up my tent quickly, ate a cold meal, and skipped the fire. I didn't want any smoke or light giving away my position. As dusk fell, I listened harder than I ever had on a trip. Every snap of a twig, every shift of branches in the breeze, made my stomach twist. Sleep came in fits. I'd drift off for maybe 30 minutes, then snap awake in a sweat. At one point in the night, I thought I heard voices in the distance. Just a low murmur, like someone talking far away through trees. I held my breath, straining to hear, but it faded. Could have been wind, could have been my imagination. I kept my knife close, laying there in the dark, listening. By dawn, I was packed up and moving again. I figured I'd stick to my loop, but push through a longer stretch that day and maybe finish a day early. I felt uneasy, like I was trespassing, like I'd been seen and marked somehow. I wanted out, but I didn't want to rush and make noise or take a bad fall. Midday, I stopped to rest on a stump overlooking a dry streambed. I hadn't seen any signs of people, but something still felt off. That's when I noticed the print, half worn into the mud at the edge of the stream. A boot print, not mine. Wide heel, heavy tread. Not fresh, but recent. Rain hadn't smoothed it out yet. I kept moving. That night, I made it to the upper edge of the loop. I could have pushed to the truck, but it would have meant night hiking and I didn't want to take the risk. I set up a final camp in a small clearing above a rock outcrop. No fire again, just dry food, filtered water, and a low profile. I slept with my boots on. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard movement near camp. This wasn't an animal. It was too slow, too deliberate. It circled wide, just beyond the tent. I couldn't see anything through the nylon, but I could hear twigs breaking and dry leaves shifting. My pulse was so loud in my ears I thought I'd pass out. I stayed frozen, clutching the knife in the sleeping bag. After what felt like forever, the sounds faded. Nothing happened. No footsteps running off. No sign of entry. Just silence again. I left at first light. No coffee, no food, no breakdown of camp. I just crammed everything into the pack and started down the trail. I didn't stop for hours, not even for water. I moved until my legs burned and my shoulders ached. I wanted to be back at the truck, engine running, wheels on gravel. When I got there, The truck was just as I left it. No slashed tires, no broken windows. But there were tracks in the dirt. Not many, just a few impressions around where I'd parked. A cigarette, but half-stamped into the ground. Could have been from earlier hikers. Could have been coincidence. Could have been someone checking to see if I was still out there. I drove fast down the mountain, checking my rear view every few minutes, expecting someone to appear from the brush with a rifle or a cold stare. But no one came. I made it home late that night and stayed up for hours, unpacking slowly, piece by piece, like I was coming down from something I couldn't explain. It's been years since that trip. I've done plenty of camping since, but I never went back to that area. I stick to well-traveled trails now, state parks, places with other people nearby. I still think about what could have happened if I hadn't tossed that log on the fire, if I just turned and run, or stuck around too long. There's a reason those stories exist. There's a reason people pass that kind of knowledge down quietly without making a big deal out of it. Because somewhere out in the woods, there are things people don't want you to find. And if you do, the only thing between you and real trouble might be a single log on a bed of cold ash. Not a word, not a confrontation, just a silent offering. And if you're lucky, they let you walk away. I've done a lot of camping over the years, mostly solo, sometimes with friends. It's become second nature to me. Setting up camp, managing gear, reading the weather, listening to the woods. I feel more comfortable out there than in a city. There's just something about the quiet and the stillness that resets everything. But that doesn't mean the woods are safe. Most of the time, they are. But when they're not, things can go bad really fast. This story happened during a solo weekend trip I took last spring. It was mid-April, just after the last snow melted in northern Pennsylvania. I had been watching the forecast for days, waiting for a good stretch of dry weather. Finally, a clear weekend rolled in. I packed my gear Friday morning, threw it in the truck, and headed north to a section of forest that didn't get much foot traffic. Not a state park or anything official, just old forest land with a few unmaintained trails left over from logging days. My plan was simple. Hike 5 or 6 miles into the woods, find a place away from any signs of people, set up camp, and spend 2 nights out there doing nothing but walking and sitting and listening to the world do its thing. The drive-in was smooth. I reached the small gravel pull-off by early afternoon and parked under a thick cover of trees. From there, I loaded up my pack and started walking. I didn't see anyone on the trail. In fact, I didn't see any fresh boot prints or tire marks on the gravel either. That's what I wanted. Just woods. The first few miles were uneventful. Damp leaves underfoot. A few early spring birds. No bugs yet, which was nice. The wind was light but steady, pushing through the high trees in long gusts that made the forest hum in waves. The trail started climbing into some rolling hills, and I took my time. The ground was still soft from the melt, so I had to watch my footing in spots, but overall it was a good hike. By the time I hit what I figured was mile 5, the light was starting to thin a little. Still plenty of time before dark, but enough that I started looking for a place to set up. I left the trail and bushwhacked for about 10 minutes until I found a decent spot in a shallow clearing surrounded by spruce. There was an old mossy boulder at one edge and a bit of a slope behind that, which helped block some of the wind. The ground was flat, dry, and free of rocks. Perfect. I dropped my pack and started setting up the tent. Just a simple one-person, low-profile shelter I'd used a dozen times before. I got everything arranged the way I liked it. Sleeping pad inflated, bag unrolled, gear stashed neatly by the door. I hung my food bag on a high branch about 40 yards from camp and collected some firewood, just enough to make a small fire after dark. I wasn't planning on cooking, just using the fire for light and warmth. As evening set in, the woods went quiet the way they always do. The sun dipped behind the ridgeline, the temperature dropped fast, and the birds stopped calling. I got the fire going and sat with my back against the rock, eating jerky and nuts, sipping water, and watching the light flicker across the tree trunks. Everything felt normal. It wasn't until I turned in for the night that I felt something shift. I crawled into the tent, zipped the door, and laid back, listening to the fire pop outside. I wasn't tired yet, so I just lay there in the dark, thinking about nothing. Maybe 20 minutes passed. The fire had burned down to embers. The breeze outside had faded. That kind of stillness you only get deep in the woods settled in. Then I heard it. A single footstep. Not close. Maybe 30 or 40 feet away. A sharp crunch of leaves. Then silence. I froze, strained to hear. Could have been a deer. I told myself that right away. It was the most likely thing. But deer move in bursts. They don't usually take just one step and stop. I waited. Then I heard another. Same distance. Same sound. Another footstep. Slow. Deliberate. My heart rate started picking up. I stayed completely still, listening, every sense wide open. The third sound was closer. This time not a footstep, exactly, but the quiet shuffle of weight on damp earth. Maybe 20 feet out. I couldn't see anything from the tent, and I wasn't about to unzip the door and shine my light out there without knowing what I was dealing with. Then another sound, a low click, like metal on stone. That one stopped me cold. Not natural, not an animal. I sat up slowly, careful not to rustle the sleeping bag too loud. I reached for the small hatchet I kept beside the door and held it across my lap. I listened harder. The woods were still, not silent like before, dead quiet. No wind, no barges, no brush rustling. Then I heard breathing. It was faint, not heavy or labored, just slow, steady, somewhere to the right of the tent. Close. I gripped the hatchet tighter. The breathing stayed for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, then stopped. After that, nothing. No movement, no sound. Just me sitting there in the dark, unsure if I should move or wait. I waited. I must have sat like that for an hour, completely still, barely breathing, just watching the tent walls and listening. Eventually, the forest slowly came back to life. A breeze moved through again. A distant owl called. The regular night sounds returned, one by one. Whatever had been out there was gone. I didn't sleep much that night. At first light, I stepped out of the tent with the flashlight in one hand and the hatchet in the other. The fire pit was just ashes. The trees were still. The clearing looked exactly the same as I'd left it. But when I walked the edge of the camp, I found something. There was a clear boot print in the soft earth about 20 feet from the tent. Deep, white, not mine. And next to it, a snapped branch. Waist high, clean break. I checked the rest of the area. No tracks leading in, no tracks leading out. Just that one boot print and the broken branch. I didn't waste time. I packed up quickly, checking over my shoulder every couple of minutes. I didn't eat, didn't bother making coffee. I just rolled everything up, loaded the pack, and got moving. The hike out felt longer than the way in. Every gust of wind through the trees made me turn. Every sound off trail sent a jolt through me. I kept the hatchet in my hand the entire way. I didn't see anyone on the way out.
No hikers. No campers.
No parked cars at the pull-off. Just my truck sitting there alone. When I got in and locked the doors, I sat there a minute, looking back at the trailhead. Still woods, still quiet, but different now. Whatever was out there that night, whoever was out there, never said a word, never showed themselves, never made a move, but they were close, closer than anyone had a reason to be, and they were watching. After that trip, I took a break from solo camping for a while. I upgraded my gear, started carrying a sidearm, chose my campsites more carefully. It wasn't animals that changed how I camp. It was people, or at least the possibility of them. Because out there, in the deep woods, when the fire burns out and the dark rolls in, the worst thing you can hear sometimes is nothing, especially when you know someone's there. I've done a lot of solo camping over the years, most of it in the Appalachians, up and down the Blue Ridge, but sometimes I'll pick more remote areas, places that don't show up much on blogs or maps, just old forest with fading trails and barely visible signs left behind from decades ago. I don't do it to prove anything or chase some idea of danger. I do it because I like the quiet. I like the solitude. But sometimes out there, the quiet doesn't feel peaceful. Sometimes it feels like you're not supposed to be there. This story happened a few years ago in western North Carolina. It was early October, when the air's dry and cool and the leaves are just starting to turn. I'd been planning a weekend trip into a part of the national forest that didn't get much traffic. A coworker of mine had mentioned it once in passing. Said he used to hunt up there when he was younger but hadn't been back in years. No trail names, just a general area to aim for. I looked it up on some old topographic maps, packed light, and headed out Friday morning. The road to the trailhead was barely more than a rutted path. Took about 30 minutes to drive 6 miles. I didn't see any other cars or campsites along the way, which was perfect. I parked under some dense trees, locked up the truck, shouldered my pack, and started walking. The trail wasn't marked, just a narrow depression in the forest floor from decades of use. It climbed slowly at first, then dipped into a hollow between 2 ridges where the trees grew thicker and the air felt cooler. It was beautiful, and more than anything, it was quiet. No cars, no airplanes, just the sounds of wind through trees and the occasional squirrel darting through the underbrush. I hiked for about 5 miles, then veered off to the left where the land sloped down into another hollow. It was around 3 p.m. when I found a good spot to make camp. There was a flat area next to a rocky creek bed, dry at the moment but clearly active in wetter seasons. Plenty of wood around, open enough to see the sky but still sheltered. I dropped my pack, cleared some leaves, and set up my small tent. I collected firewood and started a small fire, just enough to cook and stay warm once the sun went down. I didn't bring much, just a basic dinner kit, some jerky, a couple of bars, and a canteen.
No distractions.
No tech, just me and the woods. Around dusk, I was sitting by the fire, enjoying the stillness, when I noticed something odd. A smell, faint but there. A mix of wood smoke, yeast, and something chemical. Not from my fire, not from anything natural. I stood and sniffed the air again. The breeze was coming from the southeast, down along the hollow. I'd smelled that before years ago when I'd gone on a distillery tour with some friends in Kentucky. It was the smell of fermentation, moonshine, that got my attention. I'd heard rumors over the years from people who hiked in the southeast, stories about stumbling across illegal stills deep in the woods. Most were abandoned, some weren't. I'd always taken those stories with a grain of salt. I figured they were mostly just exaggeration. But right then, I knew that smell wasn't just a campfire or rotting leaves. It was something cooking and not food. Out of instinct more than curiosity, I grabbed my flashlight and walked uphill about 30 yards, just enough to get a clearer view down the hollow. The smell got stronger. I couldn't see anything through the trees, but I knew there was something not far off. I stood there for a minute, trying to decide if I should check it out or just let it be. Everything I'd ever heard said you should leave those things alone. If it was active, someone was probably watching it. Maybe not close, but close enough. And people running stills didn't usually like surprise visitors. I turned back toward camp, but that smell stuck with me. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else was out there. I didn't hear anything unusual. No footsteps, no breaking branches, just a heaviness in the air. I kept the fire going longer than usual, not out of cold, but comfort. Like maybe the light would keep the distance between me and whoever or whatever was down the hollow. At some point, I must have dozed off sitting up, because I woke up with the fire burned low and my neck stiff from the awkward angle. It was around 2 a.m., cold, silent, but I wasn't alone. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anything obvious, but I felt it, that invisible pressure you get when you know someone's watching. I turned slowly in every direction, scanning the trees with my ears, trying to pick up the tiniest noise. Then I heard a low metallic clink, maybe 50 feet away, in the direction of that smell, like something metal bumping against rock. Not loud, not repeated, just once. I stood up slowly, quietly grabbed the hatchet I kept next to my sleeping bag, and moved to the fire. I stirred the coals and threw on a few dry sticks. The flames jumped again, casting light out into the trees. I sat down on the same log and stared straight ahead. I didn't say anything. I didn't yell. I didn't want to give away how unsettled I was. But I stayed awake the rest of the night, staring into the woods, ears wide open. By sunrise, nothing else had happened. The smell was gone. The woods were back to their usual quiet, but I knew what I'd heard. I knew what I'd smelled. I ate a quick breakfast, packed up slowly, and decided to take a longer loop out, just to avoid going back the way I came. I figured it'd be smarter to leave that side of the hollow alone. If someone had been out there watching, they'd seen me light the fire. They'd seen I hadn't come closer. Maybe they took that as a sign I wasn't going to report anything. About an hour into the hike out, I noticed something off the trail. A boot print, old but not mine. Wide tread, deep heel. I kept walking. 2 miles later, I found another, this one fresher, in soft earth near a rock. Same type, same direction. I didn't stop moving, didn't sit for water. I just pushed on until I saw the clearing where I'd parked the truck. No one had tampered with it, no signs of other vehicles, but there was a small pile of leaves on my windshield. Stacked, not random, not wind-blown. It looked almost like a marker. I brushed it off, unlocked the truck, and got in fast. The drive back down that rutted road was the slowest I've ever taken. I kept checking the mirrors, watching the woods. Nothing followed. No other vehicles appeared. I made it to the highway and didn't stop until I got home. For weeks after, I kept going back over the details in my head. The smell, the sound, the prints, the stack of leaves. I never told anyone in law enforcement. Maybe I should have, but I knew better. People that run stills out there, especially the ones still doing it in modern times, they don't want attention. They've probably been out there longer than I've been alive. And the fact that nothing happened to me told me one thing. They saw I wasn't a threat. The fire I lit. The fact I didn't walk down into the hollow. The slow, deliberate exit. Those were all choices. And maybe they saw that. I haven't gone back to that section of forest. Don't plan to. Not because I'm scared, well, not exactly. It's more respect. There are places in those woods where the rules are different, where you're on someone else's ground whether there's a fence or not. And when you come across signs like I did, the smell of a still, the sound of metal, a silent night that feels too quiet, you don't push your luck. You stir your fire, you sit still, and you leave the way you came. I've spent a good part of my life outdoors, not just for weekend trips, but long hikes, overnights, week-long treks, rain or shine, heat or snow. The woods, the mountains, the trails, they've always felt like home to me. But even with all that experience, there are moments that remind you how fast things can change out there, and how small you really are when something big decides to remind you who's in charge. This happened on a solo camping trip a couple of years back. It was late September, cooler nights, shorter days, just on the edge of fall really taking hold. I had a long weekend off and decided to head out to a remote stretch of forest in northern Michigan, about 100 miles from anything like a town. I'd hiked the area a couple of times before, but this time I wanted to try a less-used trail that looped off the main one and led out to a ridge with a view over a narrow valley. The trail itself wasn't well marked, just a couple of blazes and an old game trail here and there. But I had my map, compass, and GPS. I wasn't worried. I figured I'd get out there early Friday, hike 10 or 12 miles in, set up camp near the ridge, and just enjoy the quiet. Everything started smooth. The weather was cool and dry, the trail mostly empty except for a couple of distant squirrel calls and a few small birds. I didn't see another person the whole day. Around mid-afternoon, I cut off the main path and followed an old logging road that hadn't been used in years. It was overgrown, but the footing was good, and I made decent time. By late afternoon, I'd found a solid spot just below the ridge, a level clearing tucked between some large pines, maybe 30 yards off the trail. I could see the sky above and had plenty of room to pitch my tent and gather wood. I set up camp, filtered some water from a nearby stream, and started boiling it for dinner. Just the usual dehydrated stuff, but out there it always tastes better. As night fell, I got a fire going. Not a huge one, just enough to stay warm and keep the dark at bay. The trees were tall around me, swaying just enough to make that low sound you get in pine forests when the wind cuts through. I sat back against a log, eating slowly, watching the light flicker across the ground. That was when I heard it. Not loud, not sudden. Just a soft rustle somewhere behind me. I stopped chewing and held still. Listened. Could have been a rabbit. A raccoon maybe. But the sound came again, just off to my left this time. Heavier. Slower. I turned my head slowly and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, but I still felt that edge of something. That little twinge that said I wasn't alone anymore. Then I saw it. Coyote, just at the edge of the trees, maybe 15 feet away. Lean, grayish coat, ears pricked. Stood still, watching me, not moving. I sat up straight and reached for the hatchet next to the log. Coyotes aren't usually a problem. I've seen them before, and most run off the second they know you've seen them. But this one didn't. It just stood there, locked onto me. We stared at each other for maybe 10 seconds. Then it flicked its tail and trotted off into the woods. Quiet, light-footed, gone. I watched the spot for a while just to be sure. Then I scanned around the rest of the camp. Everything seemed normal again. Just the fire, the trees, the breeze. Still, I didn't relax. I stood, grabbed the flashlight, and walked the edge of the camp, checking the brush and scanning with the beam. Nothing. No eyes reflecting back. No movement. Eventually, I sat back down and let the fire burn a little longer before turning in. I zipped the food bag up and strung it between two trees, high off the ground. Then I crawled into the tent, zipped it up tight, and stretched out in my bag. I laid there listening to the wind and the occasional crack of old branches shifting in the night. Somewhere distant, I heard a coyote call out. Not a howl, just that yipping bark they do when calling to others. Then quiet again. I must have drifted off sometime around midnight, but it wasn't a deep sleep, just that half-aware kind you get when you're in new ground. Then came the sound. Fast. Sudden. Leaves kicking up. Something heavy. I jolted awake, heart pounding, and sat up in the tent. Something big had moved just outside. Not like the earlier rustles. This was heavier, louder, like something had rushed through the underbrush. I grabbed the flashlight, turned it on, and aimed it through the mesh of the tent door. The light cut through the dark and lit up the brush maybe 10 feet away. Nothing. I unzipped the door slowly and leaned out with the light. Still nothing. Then, just as I swept the light across a low section of brush to my right, something burst out of it and ran full speed into the trees. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see it clearly, just a black blur crashing through the brush. Big, low to the ground. I stepped out of the tent slowly, scanning with the light. That's when I saw it, just a glimpse. The short tail, the size, the rounded ears. A black bear cub. It hadn't even noticed me until the light hit it. It must have been nosing around the camp for food. But the second it saw me, it bolted like lightning, crashing through leaves and brush until the sound faded completely. I stood there frozen, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. And then the real fear hit. If there was a cub, where was the mother? Everything I knew about black bears flashed through my head. Mothers are fiercely protective. If she thought I was a threat to her cub, she wouldn't hesitate. She'd charge. Fast, quiet, no warning. I turned slowly, sweeping the light in every direction, trying not to make sudden movements. Nothing yet, but that didn't mean she wasn't there. I backed slowly toward the tent, unzipped it fully, and grabbed my bear spray. I held it in one hand, flashlight in the other, eyes locked on the woods. The forest was quiet again. Not peaceful, just eerily silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. I kept the flashlight moving. My legs were tense. My stomach clenched tight. I was ready to drop everything and run, even though I knew that was the worst possible idea. Then I heard a snap. Somewhere behind me, I spun around, light cutting across the trees. Again, nothing. Was she there, watching from behind a trunk, circling downwind? I didn't wait to find out. I packed up. Fast. Tent pulled down and shoved into the pack without folding. Sleeping bag balled up. I tossed everything inside, shouldered the bag, and left the fire pit as it was. I didn't care. I needed distance. The trail was hard to find in the dark, but I knew the general direction. I hiked with the flashlight in one hand and the bear spray in the other, checking every few steps behind me. The forest stayed quiet, but I knew that didn't mean I was safe. Bears can move silently when they want to, and if she thought I was between her and her cub, she might still be looking for me. I pushed hard, hiking maybe 2 miles before I found a wider section of trail with good visibility in every direction. I stopped there, caught my breath, and sat on a rock with my back to a tree. I kept the spray ready, flashlight across my lap. I didn't sleep, not a second. The night passed slow, cold, my eyes scanning shadows, my ears tuned to every rustle of wind. But nothing else came. When the sun finally rose, I started walking again and didn't stop until I was back at my truck. I think I exhaled for the first time in hours when I closed the door behind me and sat there for a while just gripping the wheel. I didn't see the mother, not once, but she was out there. She had to have been. Bears don't leave cubs on their own. She probably heard me and the cub and decided to hold back. Maybe she saw I wasn't a threat, or maybe I just got lucky. That trip stuck with me more than others because it didn't happen fast. It wasn't some quick scare. It was slow, a build-up. One sign after another that things weren't right. Coyote too close, heavy movement in the night, a cub where no cub should have been. Out there, things can feel calm until they aren't. And sometimes it's not the danger itself, but how close it got without you knowing. Now, I don't camp without checking every inch of my surroundings. I set up farther from water sources. I use a bear canister. I stay more alert, because out there, the smallest signs, a sound, a movement, a shape in the brush, can mean something bigger is just out of view. And when you find a bear cub that close, you don't wait around. I've always been told that when you're in the woods, especially out west where the mountains stretch for miles and the trees go on forever, you've got to respect the wild. Not fear it, but respect it. That's how I've approached the outdoors for most of my life. I go in prepared, I pay attention, and I don't let my guard down just because it's quiet and peaceful. The quiet is what fools most people. It feels safe because it's still, but out there, the stillness means you're not in charge. This story happened a couple years back when I took a solo camping trip in Central Oregon. I just finished a stretch of brutal work weeks and needed to reset. I've always gone to the woods when life starts to press in too much. Something about hiking until your legs ache and setting up camp where there's no cell service just strips away everything that doesn't matter. I planned a 3-day trip along a loop trail that cuts through some remote country, forests, ridgelines, and a few glacial lakes that sit high up against the base of a craggy range. I didn't expect to see anyone else the entire time, and I liked it that way. I packed light but smart. Tent, sleeping bag, freeze-dried meals, water filter, fire starter, flashlight, headlamp, bear spray, and a fixed blade knife. I don't usually carry a gun on solo trips, though that was the last time I ever went into the woods without one. The hike in was solid. Cool weather, mostly overcast skies, but dry. I made good time and reached the lake I was aiming for by late afternoon. There were no signs of recent campers, no footprints in the dirt near the shore, no fire rings, no trash. It felt untouched. I set up camp just back from the lake under a stand of tall pines. I gathered some wood, got the fire going, and cooked up a meal as the light started fading. That night, the air was completely still. No wind, just a thick quiet that settled deep around the trees. I stayed up a bit watching the flames and listening to the sounds of small things moving through the underbrush. Probably squirrels or mice, but nothing large. I turned in early, zipped the tent tight, and fell asleep fast. I woke sometime in the middle of the night. Not sure what time, but it was pitch dark except for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the tent. I wasn't sure why I'd woken up at first. It wasn't a sound exactly. It was more like that deep, low feeling in your gut that tells you something's off. I stayed still for a moment, breathing slow, ears straining in the dark. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate crunch in the leaves. Not close, but not far either. The kind of sound that sinks into your chest and tightens everything inside. One step, then another. Slow, steady. I sat up inside the tent, careful not to make any sudden movements. I reached for the flashlight and flicked it on, but I didn't unzip the door yet. I wanted to know what was out there, but part of me didn't. The footsteps stopped. The woods went still again. I turned off the light and just listened. Another step, this time to the left. It was circling the tent. That's when the fear hit hard and real. Not panic, not yet, but that sharp rush of cold awareness that you're not alone and not in control. My mind went straight to mountain lion. It made sense. It moved too quietly to be a bear, too slowly to be a deer, and it was circling. I remembered everything I'd read over the years. Don't run. Don't turn your back. Stand your ground. Look big. Yell if you have to. Big cats are ambush predators. If they attack, it's from behind and it's fast. But usually they don't. Usually. I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped out into the cold night. The moon was high enough to cast a pale silver light across the camp. I scanned the edge of the trees and raised the flashlight. I clicked it on and swept it across the clearing. For a moment, I didn't see anything. Then the beam caught a shape low to the ground. A shine. Two reflective orbs just above the underbrush. Wide set. Motionless. It was maybe 30 feet away, crouched behind some tall grass, body pressed low to the earth, completely still except for the slow flick of a tail. Mountain lion. I stood frozen, flashlight locked on those eyes, my free hand gripping the bear spray hard enough to make my knuckles ache. I wasn't sure what to do. I knew what I was supposed to do. Make noise. Make yourself big. Stand your ground. But there's a gap between what you know and what your body wants to do. Every part of me wanted to back up, to get behind something, to run. But that's exactly what you don't do with a cat like that. If you run, you flip a switch in their brain that says chase. So I stayed put. I glanced around and spotted a long dead branch near the fire ring. I kept the light on the cat with one hand, reached for the branch with the other, and slowly raised it over my head. My shadow stretched huge across the dirt. I took one step forward, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The cat didn't move. I yelled, loud, just one sharp, wordless shout. My voice cracked, but it echoed hard in the stillness. The cat flinched barely. Then it turned its head slightly and shifted back a step. I kept shouting, waving the stick, stepping forward, slow but steady. I wasn't even thinking anymore, just doing what I could to make myself look too much trouble to bother with. After a moment, the cat backed up. One step, then another. Then it turned and disappeared into the brush like smoke. Gone. I stood there for a long time, flashlight darting through the trees, listening for the sound of it returning. But the forest stayed quiet. I didn't go back in the tent. I kept the fire burning and sat up the rest of the night, bear spray in my lap, eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Every little crack in the underbrush made me flinch. Every rustle of wind in the needles made me grip the canister tighter. But nothing else came. By first light, I had camp broken down and packed up. I skipped breakfast, filled my bottles, and hit the trail back the way I came. I kept turning around every couple hundred yards, scanning the ridges and listening for anything out of place. I didn't see the cat again, but I knew it had been watching long before I noticed it. That's how they work. You don't see a mountain lion until it decides to let you see it. When I got back to my truck, I sat on the tailgate for a long while before pulling off my boots. My body ached from tension more than the hike. I kept thinking about how close it had been, how silent it had been. If I hadn't woken up, if I'd stepped out of the tent without thinking. What then? People say mountain lions don't go after humans. And most of the time, they're right. But most of the time doesn't mean never. Out there, it doesn't take much. Just the wrong timing, the wrong move, or the wrong kind of hunger. After that trip, I changed the way I camped. I carry a firearm now. Not because I want to use it, but because there are moments when you can't yell loud enough. I hang my food higher and farther away. I build bigger fires. And I never ignore that feeling in my gut when the woods go too quiet. It's not about being afraid. It's about being ready. Because the wild isn't evil or cruel. It just is. And out there, sometimes that's more than enough to get you killed. I've always tried to stay calm when I'm outdoors, no matter what the situation is. That's something I learned early on. Panic doesn't do you any favors when you're miles from anyone, surrounded by nothing but trees, rocks, and animals that don't care how tough you are back in town. But no matter how well you prepare, no matter how many nights you've slept under the stars or how familiar you are with the trails, there's always a moment that can shake all of that out of you in seconds. For me, that moment came a few years ago on a solo camping trip deep in the Cascade Range. It was supposed to be a calm few days, just a quiet loop trail with some fishing mixed in, maybe 3 nights total if the weather held. I'd hiked the trail before in warmer months, but I picked early October this time because I wanted the woods to myself. Fewer people, no bugs, cooler air. I figured it'd be perfect. Just enough challenge to feel earned, just enough isolation to reset my head. The first day went smooth. I parked at the trailhead just after sunup and started the 10-mile hike in toward a small backcountry lake I knew wasn't on any of the official maps. It's not a big lake, more like a wide spot in a stream that flattens out and deepens just enough to hold some decent fish. The trail was damp from earlier rains, and the trees were already starting to drop their leaves. The air smelled like wet earth and cedar, and for the first few hours, I didn't see or hear another soul. That was the part one loved most, the quiet, the real kind, not silence, but the kind of quiet that hums under your skin. By early afternoon, I reached the lake and set up camp on the far side, near a ridge that blocked the wind. I got the tent pitched, gathered firewood, and started boiling water for a dehydrated meal. Everything was by the book, neat, efficient, the way I liked it. I fished a bit before sunset and pulled in a couple of small trout, which I let go. I wasn't out there for meat, just to feel normal again. The sun dipped behind the mountains by 6:30, and the temperature dropped fast. I built a fire in a ring of old stones near the tent, added some pine logs, and sat for a long while watching the flames rise and fall. You'd be surprised how fast time moves when you're staring into a fire with nothing else on your mind. The night came in full around 7:30. I finished my meal, packed up all the food, and strung the bag between 2 trees about 30 yards out, high and tight like always. I didn't want any curious raccoons or something bigger sniffing around my tent. Then I sat back down, watching the fire burn low and listening to the forest shift into its nighttime rhythm. That's when I started to feel like something was off. At first, I didn't notice it, just a little itch in the back of my neck. But then I realized the crickets had stopped. No frogs either. No distant rustle of squirrels in the underbrush or the sound of a bird fluttering up to roost. Just the fire popping softly and the wind sifting through the trees. It was too quiet, not in a peaceful way, more like the woods were holding their breath. I sat still, listening. The fire had burned low enough that it wasn't throwing light very far. The trees beyond my camp were swallowed in shadow. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on, and did a slow sweep around the camp. Nothing but trees and darkness. But the feeling stayed. It wasn't fear at that point, just unease. I double-checked my gear, made sure the bear spray was clipped to the inside of the tent where I could reach it. I keep a knife near me when I sleep, not for defense but for habit. It gives me a sense of security, even if I know it's not doing much against a big predator. I stayed up a little later than usual, just waiting for the woods to settle again. They didn't. Eventually, I doused the fire, crawled into the tent, and zipped it tight behind me. The cold had crept in, and I bundled up inside the sleeping bag, pulling the drawstring until only my nose stuck out. I turned off the light and let the dark press in. Somewhere around midnight, I woke up suddenly. It wasn't a sound that got me, not at first. It was that feeling again, that tightness in my gut, that awareness of something just outside my sense of vision. I stayed still, listening. Then I heard it, a faint crunch, then another. It sounded like something walking through the leaves, slow, deliberate, not a squirrel or a rabbit. Too heavy. I held my breath and listened closer. It circled partway around the tent, not too close but close enough that I could hear each step. Mountain lion. That was the first word that came to my mind. It was too quiet for a bear. Bears don't move like that. They shuffle, they breathe loud, they grunt. Whatever this was, it moved with care, precision. I sat up slowly, every movement silent, and reached for the bear spray. I pulled it into my lap and unzipped the sleeping bag just enough to slip my legs out. Then I picked up the flashlight, still off, and waited. The steps stopped. I clicked the light on. The beam shot through the mesh window of the tent, cutting across the trees beyond. 2 eyes reflected back. They were low, wide set. Still, it didn't blink. It didn't back away. Just sat there in the beam, watching. I didn't move for at least a full minute. My brain was going wild, trying to decide what to do next. If I stayed quiet, maybe it would leave. If I made noise, maybe it would see that I wasn't prey. But if it was hungry or desperate, it wouldn't care either way. Then the eyes disappeared. Just like that. The light hit nothing but trunks and shadows again. I kept sweeping the flashlight back and forth, heart hammering in my chest, waiting for those eyes to show up again on the other side of the tent. They didn't, but I didn't sleep after that. I sat upright the rest of the night, holding the spray in one hand, the flashlight in the other, checking the tent walls every time the wind moved them even a little. I kept listening for any return of those slow, careful steps. But I didn't hear anything more. By first light, I was already packing up. I didn't even eat breakfast. I just got everything stuffed into the pack, took down the tent, and shouldered my gear. The trail back was long, but I made it in record time, barely stopping to drink. I kept checking my six, eyes scanning every ridge, every set of brush that looked like it might hold a crouched figure. When I got back to the car, I sat behind the wheel for a few minutes, hands still shaking a little, just letting the silence of the cab wash over me. It wasn't until later, when I told a buddy of mine about it, that he reminded me something that made my skin crawl. He said if you see a mountain lion, if it lets you see it, that usually means it's been watching you for a while. Thinking back on it, the quiet in the woods, the stillness, the sense of being watched, that probably started long before I noticed it. Long before I flashed my light. I don't know if it was hungry. I don't know if it had just been following me out of curiosity or if it was sizing me up for something more serious. But I do know this, when something that powerful is out there in the dark, close enough to see you, to hear you breathe, to study how you move, and you never even know it until it wants you to, that sticks with you. That changes the way you move in the woods. I still camp, still hike, still do solo trips now and then, but I'm not as relaxed about it anymore. I take more precautions. I keep a sidearm now, and I always bring 2 light sources plus extra batteries. I study tracks more carefully, pay more attention to what the birds are doing. And when the woods go quiet, dead quiet, I listen harder, because I know now what's behind that silence. It's not just nature taking a break. Sometimes it means something's there, and sometimes it means something's already watching. I've spent a lot of time outdoors, more than most people I know. It's not just something I do on weekends or when I need to unwind. It's a part of who I am. I don't feel right unless I'm in the trees now and then. Maybe it's because I grew up that way. My dad took me hiking and camping since I could walk. Over time, I learned how to read the woods, pay attention to wind direction, notice the little changes in animal behavior, and understand when something feels wrong, even if you can't quite say why. This happened a few years back in the Sierra Nevadas. I was out on a multi-day hiking trip, solo for the most part, though I'd passed a few groups here and there on the trail earlier in the day. It was mid-September. The weather was cool but not cold yet, crisp in the mornings and warm in the afternoons. One of those perfect windows when the crowds thin out and the mountains get quiet again. I planned to hit a backcountry lake that evening, about 10 miles from the trailhead, set up camp, and then keep going deeper the next day. I started later than I should have, which wasn't smart, but I'd done this kind of thing enough to be confident. Overconfident, probably. I made decent time in the morning, but by the time I hit the last couple miles, the sun was already dipping behind the peaks, and shadows were stretching across the trail. I had a good headlamp, a backup flashlight, a solid pack with all the basics, and I wasn't panicking, just moving a little quicker than usual. That's when I started to feel it. The feeling that something was watching me. Now, I know how that sounds. It's easy to write off. You're in the woods, alone, getting tired, and your brain starts filling in gaps. But this wasn't that. I've had that paranoia before, the kind where you keep looking over your shoulder just to be sure. This was different. This was a physical feeling. The kind that presses between your shoulder blades, tightens your gut, and makes you instinctively reach for the bear spray clipped to your strap. I slowed my pace. I didn't stop, didn't turn suddenly. Just moved quieter, started listening harder. No wind.
No birds.
Even the usual crunch of chipmunks in the underbrush was gone. I couldn't hear anything except my own boots on the trail and the dry leaves brushing against my legs. That quiet, that unnatural stillness. That's what always gets me. In the woods, silence is never really silent. So when it goes dead like that, it means something's out there. I reached the lake just after sundown. It wasn't fully dark yet, but the light was fading fast. The place was beautiful, open water surrounded by thick trees and steep granite walls. The surface smooth and glassy with a faint pink reflection of the last sunlight on the rocks. I'd been there once before years ago, and I remembered a decent spot for setting up camp on a small rise just back from the waterline. I moved fast, wanting to get set up before it got too dark to see. I pitched my tent, got my pack squared away, strung up the bear bag, and collected a little firewood. I rarely build fires when I'm solo camping, but that night I wanted the extra comfort. Something to push back the dark. As I got the fire going, I kept checking behind me, sweeping the tree line with my flashlight. I kept telling myself I was being cautious, but I knew what I was really doing, trying to spot whatever had been making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. With the fire lit, I heated some water, made a freeze-dried meal, and tried to relax. I sat on a flat rock by the flames, eating slowly, listening hard. But there was still nothing.
No sounds.
No movement. Just the crackling of the fire and the quiet lapping of water against the rocks down at the shore. After I ate, I packed everything up like I always do. No scraps left out, all food hung, all gear in order. I didn't want to be careless. I walked a slow loop around the site, shining my flashlight into the trees, trying to push the feeling off me. It didn't work. The deeper it got into night, the stronger it got, like something was pacing just out of view. Eventually, I turned off the light, crawled into my tent, and zipped it up tight. I kept the bear spray inside the tent with me, tucked into the corner with my boots. My flashlight stayed in my hand. I lay there in the sleeping bag, wide awake, staring at the roof of the tent as the shadows danced from the last flickers of firelight outside. Maybe half an hour passed, maybe more. That's when I heard the sound. A light crunch, dry leaves under pressure, like a step, then another. My heart jumped. I held my breath, straining to hear. Nothing. Then another crunch. Then stillness again. It wasn't a deer. Deer move quick, skittish, erratic. This was slow, controlled, like it was being careful, like it knew I was there and didn't want me to know it was there too. I reached for the zipper on the tent door as quietly as I could and eased it open just enough to poke my flashlight out. I flicked it on and started a slow, deliberate sweep across the clearing in front of me, tracing the beam from the trees on the left, across the water, and back toward the dense brush on the right. That's when I saw them. Two eyes, low to the ground, reflective, caught perfectly in the beam. They blinked once, then stayed locked on me. I froze. They were close, maybe 30, 40 yards, just inside the edge of the brush where the trees thickened again. The light made the eyes glow, that classic golden white flash. Not human, not a deer, too low to be a bear standing up. My mind narrowed in on one option, mountain lion. I've seen mountain lions before, and they don't usually let you know they're there. If you see one, especially at night, it's because they want you to see them. And that's the part that stuck in my gut like a knife. It wasn't just nearby. It was watching, and it had been for a while. I didn't move. I kept the light steady, not wanting to spook it or make myself look like prey. I couldn't see the shape of the body, just the eyes, but I could tell it was crouched low, probably just sitting, muscles ready. It wasn't running, wasn't stalking forward, just watching. My mind raced.
Doyel.
No, that might trigger a reaction. Do I get out of the tent and try to make myself look big? I didn't know if it would help or just invite a charge. So I did the one thing that felt right. I stayed where I was, quiet, still, light locked on those eyes. My heartbeat pounding so hard I thought it might vibrate the tent poles. After maybe a minute, maybe two, the eyes blinked again, then slowly turned. The light caught the outline of the head just enough for me to see it shift sideways. Then the eyes vanished into the brush. I waited. 10 minutes. Then 20. Nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat upright, flashlight in one hand, bear spray in the other, scanning the clearing again and again, sweeping the trees every few minutes. I never saw the eyes again, but I knew it had been there long before I'd noticed. I could feel it in the way the woods had gone still, in the way my skin had crawled all afternoon. I'd been followed. By the time the sky started turning gray, I already had my pack halfway loaded. I didn't bother with breakfast. I took down the tent, repacked everything fast, and got moving as soon as I had enough light to see the trail without the headlamp. Every few hundred yards, I checked behind me, scanned ridges, listened. I didn't hear or see anything, but I still didn't relax until I was halfway back to the trailhead. Even then, I didn't stop until I was in my truck, gear packed, doors locked. I've been in the woods hundreds of times since then. I still go solo sometimes, though not as far out and not as casually. I carry a sidearm now. I've studied more on predator behavior, especially big cats. I know how rare it is for them to attack humans, especially in places like the Sierra Nevadas. But knowing that doesn't take away what it felt like. Knowing that doesn't erase the memory of those eyes, fixed on me in the dark, completely silent, completely still. That trip reminded me of something important. The forest doesn't care who you are or how many nights you've spent out there. When you're in their space, you're not in control. You're part of the system again. And sometimes you get reminded in ways that don't let you forget. It didn't pounce. It didn't charge. It didn't growl or roar. It just watched. And somehow that was worse.